Major support for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
What is it like to be an ex-president or an ex-CEO? Or how about an ex-governor? Welcome again to the most widely watched and the longest-running source of Carolina business and public policy, seen every week for more than 25 years now across North and South Carolina. I am Chris William, and this time on Carolina Business Review and Executive Profile, the Tar Heel State's 74th governor, Pat McCrory. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. Please visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, an executive profile featuring Pat McCrory, former North Carolina governor.
Welcome to our program, Governor. Welcome back.
It's great to be back.
You're smiling. You're happy.
I'm relaxed. I'm getting some golf in. Like, my game is just as bad as it was when you and I used to play 30 years ago.
Yeah, but my game's horrible. I just don't play, so that I'm not a comparison. So, tell me something. What is it like to be an ex-governor?
It's a culture shock because people don't realize when Governor Cooper did something very unique. He got sworn in on New Year's night, which had never been done before. Usually the new governor got sworn on the 5th or the 10th or the 15th of January, but he decided to get sworn in at 12:01. So I was dropped off in my driveway. Ann and I were dropped off on 1963 Maryland Avenue in Charlotte, and the trooper said, "Thanks." Walked away, said, "We've been ordered back to Raleigh." And so the people you've been driving you around and basically living in a car for 4 or 5 hours a day just walk away from your life after 4 years. So it's quite a culture shock, and you lose your team. So the day I walked out of the mansion, it was with no fanfare. I just walked out with no entourage. I just got in my car and drove home. And when I got and pulled up the driveway, they just said, "Thank you very much." So there's no big party or celebration, and all of a sudden you're all alone. And you have to learn how to drive again.
Yeah, well,
I've only been in one accident since I've come back to Charlotte. It wasn't my fault either, but I followed the lead of, I think both Governor Holshouser and Governor Martin both got in accidents when they came back home.
Driving skills not as much.
No.
Well, so was that about the state and the state of politics in North Carolina? Is that what that's about? Is that about Roy Cooper? Is that about you? Is that about something else?
I have no idea. I think they were maybe concerned that maybe I was going to do something between January 1 and the 5th, which when I came into office, Governor Perdue and I had an agreement that after the 1st, she would commit not to do anything, no executive orders, and she said no problem. So we had an agreement, and we went, and I was there during her swearing-in ceremony, and she was there during mine. And we transferred the seal, but Governor Cooper and I didn't have that opportunity. So it was a very odd circumstance, but that was a decision made by Governor Cooper and his staff. And it had never been done before in North Carolina history, but he has that right. He was the governor, and if he wanted to be governor at 12:01 New Year's night, he was allowed to do that.
But, you know, I would say, Mr. McCrory, that was probably not unfounded, because the General Assembly has since tried to limit the governor's powers. So when you look at what the General Assembly and how the General Assembly is with the governor now, he did have some coverage that he'd be worried about. I don't know if it was about
I don't think it would have happened on New Year's Day, but
stranger things have happened.
You know, I had similar battles with the legislature. There's going to constantly be battles between any executive branch and the legislative branch. You see that in Washington, you see that in Raleigh. I sued my own Republican legislature. Most people forget that. Took a case to the Supreme Court where I thought the legislature was taking over my operations responsibility of running state government, and I won the Supreme Court case. And so people don't realize I had to fight my Republican legislature. At other times, I had a great relationship with them. In fact, most people don't realize, but about 90% of my budget and all 4 budgets were adhered to, and about 90% of my proposals were approved, which is one reason I'm very bullish on North Carolina. I mean, the economy is booming. We have a surplus, incredible, over $500 million surplus. I paid off the debt of $2.6 billion. Teacher pay raises, as I predicted, are now, it was 41st in the nation in my second year in office. It's now down to 32, I believe, in the nation in teacher pay raise. That's a huge progress in a short period of time. Medicaid, I inherited a $500 million Medicaid overrun, which I didn't know about until I came into office. And Dr. Voss and others did a great job in getting rid of that. So the government's in pretty good shape right now.
You know, as you tick down that list of successes, and you should, there were a lot of things done, I think, that get, it's not my personal opinion, but a lot of things get lost in the hyperbole of what politics are in North Carolina. But it's also like that in the country now, Governor. How do you think how do we find ourselves at this place where we're, you know, the right and the left are so intractable, and now it's about undermining someone's character so their opinion doesn't matter.
Right.
Can we reverse that?
Oh, I think we can, although what I learned during my 4 years as governor, which was a big change from 15 years ago during my 14 years as mayor of Charlotte, is the third-party groups have a great deal of impact over the dialogue and over the media. For example, during my tenure as governor, within 2 weeks, I had protesters outside the mansion, and I had them for 4 years. I had no idea where they came from, who was paying for the coordination of that. It didn't end until I moved out. In fact, even after the election, the protesters brought a moving van to the mansion. And
symbolic of you leaving the mansion?
Symbolic of me leaving. And the media was there to show, you know, 15 to 20 protesters out of a 10 million population of North Carolina, the 9th largest state, but they knew how to get publicity, and it was very well coordinated and well paid for. And you're seeing that at the congressional meetings now, where all of a sudden there are people with red signs and green signs. Believe me, that is well coordinated. It's not saying the protesters are paid, but someone has to be paid to coordinate that. And I think that's one of the best kept secrets on both the left and the right.
So if you were to run for governor again or some other higher office,
right.
What would you do differently now, knowing that the way to win at politics is how it is now? I mean, how would you change your MO? How would you change the dialogue?
You know, we never caught that equation because the media just loved the protest and blew it up much larger than it ever was. And I never figured it out. Now, President Trump figured it out by doing tweets. And he went around the major media and said, this is what these people are doing. That's a great technique that I did not use during my campaign. Maybe I should have. I do not think it's a good technique while governing. I don't think President Trump should be tweeting at 5 o'clock in the morning. I think that's a terrible technique and does a disservice to his team and to his cabinet. Had I done that during my tenure as governor, I think my cabinet would have walked out.
But
during a campaign, he got around the media, which frankly is more liberal, and it's going to apply to that. And it was pretty smart. I don't think it's a good governing tool.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep interrupting. Have you talked to President Trump recently? And how would you rate his performance as chief executive of this country?
I like some of his appointments in foreign policy. I like his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, the UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who is a great friend of mine, I think is doing an outstanding job. I think he's done some good appointments on his cabinet. I think what he's got to do is make a decision, and all presidents have to make decisions. Is he going to let the cabinet have some power? President Obama didn't allow that to happen. It was very centrally controlled by the White House. I'm seeing the same thing by President Trump, very centrally controlled, very much like President Obama. As governor, I basically was different than that. I kind of followed more the Reagan model, and it's risky. My secretaries, from Commerce Secretary Sharon Decker or John Scavarla, or my Health and Human Services Secretary Rick Brazier, Aldona Voss, or my Public Safety Secretary, I gave them the authority to make decisions and operate and get a lot of exposure, although the media didn't give them a lot of exposure. But I gave them a lot of decision-making authority, and I met with them every Tuesday morning together. And our cabinet meetings were a problem-solving step as part of the process to develop what problems do we have and what's our long-term strategy. And I think that's one of the reasons we had such successful results in the management of state government and the strategy of state government. It wasn't successful in the politics of state government because I lost the closest election in North Carolina history, but I'm very, very proud of my team and the end results, and we're seeing it today. Some reports just came out last week where travel and tourism was at its highest last year, during my last year. Business recruitment was at its highest of any time in North Carolina history last year. You just wouldn't have known that by meeting the press coverage because the third-party groups pivoted to other issues that have since disappeared. For example, the third-party groups in September, October, and November of last year during our campaign, all you read about was coal ash and about $10 to $20 million of ads against me in coal ash. Since then, have you heard anything about coal ash? Nothing's been done, but the media has not talked about it anymore. And that was the third-party groups that were so influential in directing the media toward other issues other than the economy and education, which we made improvements on. They needed to divert that attention, and that was brilliant. It was brilliant at my expense.
Well, but the lightning rod, obviously, was House, Senate, House Bill 2. That became something other than the description.
Another brilliant distraction.
Agreed or not, but here's the thing, Governor. Now that we have decision, that we have some kind of satisfaction on to close the loop on Senate House Bill 2 in North Carolina, is it satisfactory? Is it the right way forward for the state?
I'll say this: it was a symbolic, manufactured issue coming out of an interest group out of Washington D.C., and it's a symbolic, manufactured solution to take it out of the headlines. And I was searching for that and trying to get the votes for the same type of symbolism. And I'll just say that there's a lot of created controversy, and as you see, nothing's really changed, but businesses now have an excuse to get back to normal.
Is that what we're seeing? So the cause and effect, for instance, Credit Suisse recently announced that they will add 12 to 1,500.
Well, that was coming anyway. That was in the pipeline. There were a lot of jobs in the pipeline as I left office in a lot of these companies, but companies and other organizations that were being pressured by this Washington, D.C. group needed an excuse to move on. And they got that excuse by a symbolic compromise. And by the way, I supported that symbolic compromise because I knew the whole issue was rather symbolic, created controversy. That started right in Charlotte, sadly.
So what is the state, what has North Carolina learned from this?
Well,
and I'm asking you,
most people don't know the inside details of that whole issue, but the group that brought that to North Carolina, the HRC, who the leader of that is extremely strategic politically, almost Machiavellian. He told me in my office that I'm going to make North Carolina the epicenter of this issue.
Why not Texas?
Issue. They lost in Texas. See, they had already lost in Texas. They lost a battle in Houston, Texas, even though the NCAA went ahead and played their games. Texas was too big to fight. North Carolina was more of a blue-red state. There was a gubernatorial campaign. They were going to make that the issue. It was very brilliant tactician. And he told me right out, he said, I'm going to make North Carolina the epicenter. You have no idea what's going to hit you. And he said a few other things. That, and everything he said was true. And that was January?
February of 2016?
Yeah.
So here we are now.
But that's an example of some third-party groups. By the way, the right has third-party groups too. The Tea Party was financed by, and that was due to health care concerns to defeat Obamacare. So there's some well-kept secrets about who funds these groups. Soros on the left, and Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation here in Winston-Salem funds a lot of the more left-wing groups, Goodman, WREL, and so forth. And there are right groups that support. So these third-party groups are becoming very powerful and have a lot of influence over media coverage.
So if you look at the larger impact here, you got Donald Trump in the White House, which is he's been a lightning rod, and he has done some things that he energizes both sides of the aisle. But isn't there something going on here, Governor, about if Trump doesn't get it done, then there'll be another candidate that might be an extreme left candidate, but aren't people looking for not status quo, not business as usual? Isn't that what we're talking about here?
Well, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were both populist candidates, and I was right in the middle of the campaign. I was with Donald Trump, got to know him extremely well. I went up to Trump Tower in December. I had very good conversations with him. I got to see him behind the scenes. But he and Bernie Sanders, there was a populism against the elite. Sometimes it's the media elite, some of it was the business elite, some of it was the government elite. In fact, I probably lost 1 or 2% of the Trump vote, and I lost an election by less than 10,000 votes because some of the Trump people didn't vote for me because I was part of the status quo. And so there was a fight against the status quo that I think the media and the political pundits were blindsided by. I saw it out there, and I was in a unique position because here I was the incumbent governor, and I was saying there's a Carolina comeback, and then President Trump, then candidate Trump, would come right next to me and go, "Oh my God, things are terrible." So would Bernie Sanders.
Would you be a different candidate then if you said you were part of the status quo?
I don't think I think some other factors probably impacted me. One, I was outspent, about $50 million to $25 million.
Do you want to run again?
I'll make that decision down the road. I don't know. I may make that decision, but that's 4 years down the road or 3 years down the road. And I don't miss being governor. I miss the job of governor. And I miss the team that we put together that was a problem-solving team, that was transparent, that was ethical. And I'm very proud of the changes we made. The bonds, for example. You're going to see some incredible construction coming in North Carolina. The university bonds.
Transportation or infrastructure?
That's, university, parks, the National Guard, the ports. We're going to have some incredible new expenditures, especially on science and math labs at our universities, at Western Carolina, the medical at Carolina, NC State Ag. I'm extremely proud of that and leading that campaign. The one thing, the caution for North Carolina, because I'm bullish on North Carolina, is the transportation infrastructure. People are wanting to come in North Carolina in the thousands.
So organic growth is an issue.
The organic growth and the infrastructure to keep it up. You see it especially in the metro areas, but you're going to see it in the connectivity of each of the metro areas of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And if we don't start putting more money into infrastructure, we're going to suffer 10 to 20 years from now. When I was mayor, I put together a 25-year transportation plan, which we're about the 23rd or 24th year of that. And the mass transit and things of that nature. And it's working.
So
But I did the same 25-year transportation plan for North Carolina, and we transferred money, but we need more bonds.
Well, let me bring you back to this, because it's just going to kind of tie some of these things together, Governor. So you and Nikki Haley were pretty much on the same page when it came to a lot of things, and you talked about—
I have a lot of respect for her.
Well, so why wouldn't North Carolina and South Carolina, a lot of familial connection, a lot of the same type of issues in economic development and transportation connectivity, why wouldn't the states work more closely together about being better about cost and better about deploying assets like transportation?
Actually, Nikki and I were working together. When I was mayor, I was working together with fellow mayors, Rock Hill and Fort Mill and other mayors, and even Greenville and Spartanburg. I got to know those mayors extremely well, and we were knowing Charlotte and Greenville, Spartanburg is a business corridor, all the way down to Atlanta to Birmingham. So the infrastructure, if they don't do a good job in Georgia and South Carolina infrastructure, Charlotte, Greensboro will be impacted. because of the I-85 corridor. So Nikki and I were actually, I developed my 25-year plan for North Carolina infrastructure was just not internal North Carolina. It was how can we better connect to Greenville, Spartanburg, to across the border in Tennessee, to Norfolk, Virginia, Elizabeth City, for example, which is not recovered as other areas have. My transportation plan was to build a highway to the Virginia, and working with Terry McAuliffe, and before that his predecessor, and going, how can we connect Elizabeth City with Norfolk and the Hampton Roads area, because their best opportunity for economic growth is to connect to Virginia, not to North Carolina. Very similar. Rock Hill's best economic opportunity is to connect to Charlotte. And I saw that and stole that concept from South Carolina and applied it to Elizabeth City.
And South Carolina is getting close to wrapping up their legislative session. One of the things they've struggled with mightily has been transportation funding.
Yeah.
They've got it, they've got a plan, but is there something that North Carolina can learn from not just their struggles, Governor, but also from you changed the DNA of what the transportation funding was going to be.
Ned Curran, who was my transportation chairman of the transportation committee, we took the politics out of transportation. It's my second most proudest thing I accomplished.
Well, North Mecklenburg won't agree with that, but I know what you're saying.
No, actually, that was a non-political decision actually made by local politicians on
How does that get lost in the press? The idea that it's become
that's
McCrory
my fault.
did this, and the
actually,
toll road.
The toll lane. It was a toll lane, by the way.
Lane.
That was another BT, and others would go toll road, and so I'd probably say 90% of the people think that's going to be a toll road, not a toll lane. So, I lost the communication argument on that, and it was actually something started during the Perdue administration. And in fact, Roy Cooper's new DOT secretary worked for me and Governor Perdue and was the architect of the whole toll lane concept for the state of North Carolina. And now he's DOT secretary, and yet, some people would say he got elected because of the toll lane controversy.
Isn't it?
So is there, it's a full circle, isn't it?
Well, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
So is there going to be a streamlined momentum to transportation because he has been the
Well, I think this is going to be a major issue at the federal level, too, because one thing I'm excited about President Trump, and I wish he'd move on with it, is have a major infrastructure plan. I've talked to Elaine Chao, in fact, traded notes with her last week, talking about some ideas on how we can speed up this infrastructure plan, but part of it's going to be how do you pay for it? And the concept of toll lanes will come at the national level. And President Trump better be wary of I love that idea as long as it's someone else.
You want a job in his administration? You want to work? Has he offered you one? Do you
We
want
talked about it in December. I've made a point, but at that point in time, I was dealing with wildfires and the hurricane. And I'd just been defeated when I went up to the Trump Tower, and I was not ready to make that decision personally, or my family wasn't either. And most people don't realize the day after the election, which they called me the victor for about a half hour, and then it was changed. The next day, I was out working on hurricane and wildfires in the mountains. So between then and January 1st, when the troopers dropped me off and said, "Great knowing you,"
Great to see you.
I was going full scale, kind of like this interview. At the beginning, people don't realize during the month of December, after I had lost the campaign, my team didn't have a chance to breathe because of the incredible smoke up in the mountains. And then, towns like Princeville, which were just totally destroyed. And it still sticks with me, the pain and suffering that Princeville and Lumberton and Kinston and Goldsboro went through.
Right.
It was a time I'll never forget. It was probably the most moving time of my life, was dealing with that hurricane.
I don't want to minimize that. We do have a couple minutes left, and Governor Cooper has seemed to have adopted your formula and your plan for what economic development ought to be run through the partnership that's a nonprofit now.
I'm glad to see it. He was fighting it during the campaign, but I think he's come around to accept it. He was also fighting, he said, no more corporate giveaways. Well, they just did
as incentives? You mean an incentive package?
He was against corporate giveaways during our campaign, but the company that you just mentioned with 2,000 new employees got a grant incentive or a tax incentive. So some people change during a campaign to when they're elected.
How aggressive was your administration? How aggressive are administrations in clawbacks for incentives that are not fulfilled?
Oh, we are very, we clawed back several during, if a company does not meet the criteria, we don't pay out any money. They do not get a rebate of taxes they've already paid until they have met the employee requirement that they promised to hire or the capital investment. And several companies did not meet that requirement, and they never got the money. And
is that
I was very, very strict on that. By the way, John Laster here from Charlotte just did a great job, and John Scavarla and Sharon Decker was the one who recommended, as my first Commerce Secretary, to privatize that. I'm very pleased to see Governor Cooper keeping that, although they made some threats to my current chairman to leave in order for it to stay, and John Laster and his professionalism say, I'll do anything to keep the current setup, and if it takes me leaving, I'll do it. And I admire John for doing that.
We are out of time. Governor, thank you for being on the program. You said something
Chris.
years ago, and I want to thank you for your service, because politics aside, you said one time it's easy to throw stones and to be critical when you're not in the race, and you've been in the race. So thank you for doing it.
It's been a great honor and privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching our program. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night. Have a good weekend.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Novant Health, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.